Aki and Nara were a recently married couple. To live a more comfortable life, the two decided to purchase an apartment in the suburbs. Both of them were overjoyed because they had discovered a location that was both inexpensive and convenient for travel. Sweet happiness didn't last long, as both of them were subjected to a terrifying story. It happened just a few weeks after the two moved into this apartment. There was an apartment in front of their house that was said to be empty, but Nara had seen a woman standing in front of the apartment door several times. When Nara noticed it, the woman turned to face the door, mumbling something inaudible. Although Nara was concerned about this issue, because Aki was preoccupied with the game, he only said a few words of comfort to calm her down. "There's nothing where there are no strange neighbors." Thinking everything would pass, Aki unexpectedly met the woman after his overtime work and returned home late. As soon as he stepped out of the elevator, Aki noticed a woman standing in front of the door to the apartment opposite his. The woman stood motionless, her head against the door frame, muttering something that piqued Aki's interest. Her behavior was identical to what Nara had described earlier. He also purposefully moved closer to hear her words clearly. It turned out that the woman wanted to enter the house but was unable to do so. Aki wondered if it was because she hadn't brought her keys, so he asked her if there was anyone else inside so he could assist her in calling and asking them to open the door. When she heard that, the woman turned her head and looked at Aki, her face expressionless, and explained that she was the only one living here and that there was no key to open the door. With no other option, Aki offered to call a locksmith to assist in opening the door. Following that, he immediately dialed the repair center, explained the situation to them, then hung up and went home, leaving the woman outside to wait. After about half an hour of resting in his house, he heard a knock on the door outside. The locksmith asked who needed assistance unlocking the door as soon as he saw Aki. Aki also quickly led the man over to the opposite apartment to meet the woman, but she was nowhere to be found. The locksmith assumed she had already found the key and entered the room. So the locksmith sighed and walked away. What a waste of time, despite Aki's apology, and offered to reimburse his travel expenses, which he declined. Things began to become more terrifying and terrifying as the days passed. When Nara and Aki were fast asleep in the middle of the night, they both heard a voice outside the door. Due to the quiet of the night, a loud cry woke both of them up, especially the cry that sounded like a lament, which was very sad. Because it was unusual for someone to call the door in the middle of the night, Nara did not dare to go see what was going on, so she let Aki open the door himself. On his face, Aki appeared unconcerned, but he was irritated at being bothered in this manner. He rolled out of bed, grabbed a baseball bat, and walked slowly to the door. The closer he got, the clearer the cry became. When Aki arrived at the door, he didn't rush to open it, but instead looked outside through the binoculars on the door to see who it was. At first glance, it appeared to be the same woman he had seen the last time. This time, however, she turned to find his family. Even more horrifying, Aki could see the corners of her eyes and her mouth bleeding and a distressed expression. She seemed to be aware that Aki was looking through the binoculars on the door, so she sobbed even more and begged him to help her. When Aki saw the scene, he became so nervous and scared that he suffocated and backed away from the door. Fortunately, the woman did not move. Aki quickly dashed back to his bedroom. Nara asked who was outside the door after noticing Aki's pale face and knowing there was something scary outside. To avoid frightening his wife, Aki pretended to be calm, claiming that it was just the cat meowing. Nara felt much better after hearing her husband say that. There were no more cries outside. Nara went to bed right away after solving the problem, but her husband couldn't sleep. He sat with his back to the head of the bed, his mind racing over what had just occurred. Aki requested a day off from work on Monday because he was sick. When his wife left for work, he went straight to the apartment building's management office to inquire about it. As soon as Aki walked into the office, he yelled at the manager, "You scammed us! This apartment has ghosts! That's why it's so cheap, isn't it?" The manager didn't understand what Aki said, and he was perplexed by what Aki said about ghosts. Aki immediately informed the manager of everything that had occurred over the last few days. The manager appeared suspicious, but he maintained a serious expression and listened intently to what Aki had to say. The manager quickly took out a small notebook with dense notes, as well as a large number of contact information for people who used to live here. He checked carefully and immediately found a phone number of Taro, the former owner who used to live in the apartment across the hall from Aki. They hadn't seen him in the apartment in 2 months. The manager paused for a moment, recalling that the last time he saw a woman accompanying him into that apartment was 2 months ago. Linking the facts, Aki suspected that there was a problem with that apartment, so he devised a plan to visit it to ascertain the situation. The manager, on the other hand, disagreed with Aki because it was someone else's house. Aki did not have the right to enter on his own. The manager considered that even if the apartment had problems, the management wasn't responsible for them. Aki was disappointed and concerned as he walked out of the management office. As he sat at home, he began to consider a few things. He and his wife had used up all of their savings to buy this house, and they still owed a significant amount of money to the bank. So they couldn't just walk away because they were haunted. The more he thought about it, the more enraged he became, and he didn't want his life to be ruined as a result of these things. He also couldn't afford to waste time waiting for someone else to solve the problem. He noticed the crowbar in the corner of the wall as soon as he looked to the side. When he looked at it, he had an idea. He stood up and looked towards the crowbar. To find the truth, he did not hesitate to make amends for the damage of that apartment. Thinking about it, Aki grabbed the crowbar and proceeded to the apartment across the hall. Aki inserted one end of the crowbar into the door and then tried his hardest to pry it open. An impact force deformed the door lock after hearing a few clicks. Finally, it was opened. Aki kicked open the door to gain courage. The door swung open quickly and collided with the wall, causing the door frame to be shaken. At that moment, an object fell from the door frame and landed hard on the ground. Aki quickly picked it up and discovered it to be a bronze mirror. This item was used to expel demons, and it was frequently hung in front of a house. He returned his gaze to the room. The surroundings were dusty and the air was gloomy and ghostly. At this point, Aki noticed a faint odor, not too rotten but strong enough to guess it was the stench of corpses. When he discovered suspicious traces, he abruptly came to a halt in front of a wall. The wall was streaked with light red water that emitted a stench. Water stains appeared to be leaking from within this wall. Aki was terrified when he realized what was behind the wall, but he had no choice but to dig into it in order to get an answer. Aki used all of his strength to hit the wall with the crowbar, and each piece of cement quickly broke down. The peculiarity was the concrete layer was not hard or thick but rather a thin layer. After the outer layer was removed, a layer of granular black material appears. Aki quickly reached out to brush away the layer of black grains. Then he touched something very soft and sticky. Aki began to tremble in fear after touching something filthy, and his forehead was also covered in beads of sweat. He didn't dare to wipe with his hand anymore, so he took a crowbar and continued chiseling the lime on the wall to see clearly. After the layers of material fell away, a purple-blue hand appeared on the wall, showing signs of decay and looking extremely frightening. Because he was terrified, Aki immediately backed away, his entire body trembling violently. Finally, he had to try to hold back his vomiting and flee this apartment. The police arrived less than half an hour after Aki called them and sealed off the entire scene. They also discovered the body of a woman who had been dead for more than 2 months in the wall. After the police began their investigation, they were able to identify the perpetrator, who also happened to be the owner of the apartment, Mr. Taro. The deceased woman was his lover, according to the testimony. Mr. Taro inadvertently killed the woman with a knife due to a personal conflict. He attempted to conceal his crime by concealing her body in the wall. To keep the stench at bay while hiding the body, he applied a layer of activated bamboo charcoal to the surface. As a result, when Aki punched the wall, the black granular soft substance that appeared was activated carbon. Aki later thought of it, perhaps because he was afraid of the witch's vengeance, so he attached a bronze mirror to prevent the woman from entering his house. Immediately after Mr. Taro's crimes were exposed, Nara and Aki no longer saw the woman's ghost. However, the apartment opposite their house was still sealed off and silent, sometimes causing them to live in fear.